I am purposely wearing the suit that I'm wearing today, and in fact the bow tie that I'm wearing today. This suit and this bow tie were a gift from my friend George, passed away, and I spoke with Sherry. He's not having a funeral service, and I asked if it'd be okay if I dedicated this morning's sermon to him, because from my relationship with George, I thought about him some while I prepared this sermon. George, like many of those in his generation, they know and have known what it means to struggle. That generation did not always have things maybe as easy, even physically speaking, as we do. And they came through some difficult times in the Lord's church, and they faced a lot of difficulties. And I love George, and I'm thankful for George. And I think that he would appreciate this sermon. I'm going to talk this morning about Jacob. Jacob, otherwise known as Israel. If you add up the Jacobs and the Israel, it's over 2,000 times that name is used in the Bible. Rarely, especially once you get to Israel, even under Jacob, much of the time that it's used with reference to God's people, not with the man himself. Israel, the word Israel is rarely used of Jacob himself. It's typically used of God's people. But make no mistake about it, when God says Israel to the people, the children of Israel, he's referencing all the way back to this man Jacob. God's faithful, all the way up to the cross, were called by this man's name. And even today, what does Paul say? We are spiritual Israel. God's people, even up to today, are called by this man's name. And to be quite honest with you, in a lot of ways, he wasn't a very good person. In other words, he had some serious flaws, and we might look at him if we wanted to be judgmental and say, well, I don't think I like him very much. I don't think I'd want to spend much time with him, because he sure did struggle with some ugly things during his lifetime, and he sure did behave in ways that I wouldn't want to be treated in his lifetime. Jacob had so many struggles. And we're going to look at, first, a list of those struggles. But before we get into that, let's look at our key words. So young people, if you're old enough to take the notes written out, you take the notes written out. But if you need keywords, here's your keywords today. Jacob, struggle, and angel. Okay? So you can write those down. We'll give you just a second to write those down. If you're sitting next to an adult who can help you write them down, you can have that adult help you write them down. Those are your key words today. So starting right now, that'll start your count. If you're not familiar with that and you got a young person here, the idea is write down the word, and every time I say it, then they put a mark there, and they're counting up the number of times that I say that word. So, for instance, we're going to talk about Jacob. There's one for that. All right. What we're going to discuss first is that Jacob had many struggles. Let's look at the struggles of Jacob. There's quite a few to name. You might think of a couple more, but here's the ones I could think of as I read through this passage this week. If you're reading about Jacob, you're reading from about Genesis 25 till about Genesis 47, okay? Genesis 25 to Genesis 40, quite a few chapters that cover his life. Now, not all of those chapters are really dedicated to him, but quite a large range in the book of Genesis. But let's look, going all the way back to in the womb. You remember that his mother said, if all is well, why is it like this? And she was talking about the fact that he literally struggled with his brother when he was in his mother's womb. They strove with each other to such a degree that she didn't know what was wrong with her. She didn't think she was well in her pregnancy. If you recall, when he comes out of the womb, he obviously lost that struggle, by the way. I assume that the struggle was over who would come out of the womb first. Because when Esau came out, do you remember what Jacob did? How he got his name? Jacob means supplanter. When he came out, he grabbed Esau's heel and said, he's a supplanter. We're going to name him Jacob, or supplanter. He struggled for Esau's birthright. You recall when he found Esau, or Esau found him, and Esau says, I'm perishing, I'm near death. And up until this week, I always believed that Edom, the nation of Edom, who's the descendants of Esau, I always believed, that means red, by the way, I always believed that was because of Esau's red hair. Remember Esau had red hair? It's not because of his red hair. I'd never noticed this before. But if you go to that passage there where he talks about that, we're not going to for the sake of time, but Jacob gave him that name. He was cooking a red stew. Esau sold his birthright. What that means is Esau was born first. The seed line of Jesus Christ should have come through Esau and would have come through Esau. Of course, God foreknew it wouldn't. He told her that. But he sold it for that pot of red stew. So if you fast forward through history to the time that the Jews have come out of Egypt, and they cross that deserted land, and they're going to walk right into the promised land, only there's a nation between them and the promised land, and that's the nation of Edom. That's the nation of Esau. That's the nation that's named after that red stew. And they reject Israel. They reject Jacob's children, and they say, you will not pass through our lands. It should have never been that way. That history should have never played. So Jacob struggled with Esau to purchase his birthright with a pot of stew, red stew. He struggled for Esau's blessing. Now that was an ugly. This is one of the things where you start getting that. You could say it was kind of dirty for first place to tempt Esau to sell his birthright for a pot of stew. That's pretty dirty, but that's also Esau's foolishness. But man, this next one, the blessing. So in those days, in the days of the patriarchs, the fathers could give blessings, and they really, really meant something. If you gave a blessing to your son, those things would be true for that son. And he had withheld the best blessing, the great blessing for his firstborn son, even though he sold his birthright. He withheld it for Esau. If you recall, he sends Esau out. He says, go get me something to eat. But boy, oh boy, did Rebekah have. Rebekah was a sneaky person, was not in every way a very moral person, and she came up with a plan, and Jacob went along with it, and they tricked him into believing that Jacob was Esau. They tricked Isaac into believing that. Isaac is old, he's blind, he's feeble, and they trick him into believing that Jacob is Esau. And what does he do? He gives the blessing to Jacob. He struggled, he worked hard, he deceived even to take the blessing of Esau. Here is the first example of certain deception that he used in his struggles. In other words, he's not righteous here. He's not doing right. He struggled for his life, as we might well suppose. Esau is a man's man. He's a manly man. He's a hunter, and he says, I'm going to kill him. When I was near death, he made me give my birthright for some stew, and now he's gone and taken my blessing. I'm going to kill him. Soon as the days, he knew his father was near death. Soon as my father dies, soon as the days of mourning are over for my father, I'll kill him. All right? He struggled for his life. He had to run away. He had to go live with Laban. That leads him to struggle for Rachel. You remember he goes and he falls in love with Rachel, and he loves Rachel, and he says to Laban, I'll work for you. What would it take? What would you need? He said, work for me 7 years. He said, okay, I'll work for you 7 years for Rachel. And then at the end of that 7 years, what does Laban do? Jacob gets a little taste of his own medicine. Laban sends in Leah with a shawl on her face, tricks him into marrying Leah. And then he has to struggle for Rachel again. Because he says, well, you got me. Now what do I have to do to get Rachel? He says, well, 7 more years. Now, he didn't make him wait the 7 years. He made him wait 1 week. I don't know. They had a weird custom where you could marry a girl's sister if you waited a week. I don't know about that. But that's what he did. He waited a week, and he was able to marry Rachel. And then he says, you got to work. This man worked 14 years for a wife he wanted and a wife he didn't. He struggled for Rachel. And then he struggled with his wives. By the way, do you think God knows what he's talking about when he said one man, when he set it up for be one man with one woman for one lifetime? I'm still learning how to be a good husband to my one wife. I have no idea how any man that ever lived thought that he could learn to be the right kind of husband to more than one wife. Not to mention the dynamics that would occur between the women, which happens here. Leah is jealous. Why? Because my husband worked 14 years for another woman. He didn't even work for me. None of that was for me. They tricked him into marrying me. And what does she do? She has children. Okay, now what happens? Now Rachel's jealous because Leah gave him children. And now I'm on the bottom. And they have fighting between them. And this dynamic, and guess what Jacob ends up suffering with? He struggles with the problem of having 2 wives. And in particular, I just can't even imagine, 2 wives that are sisters. He struggles against Laban. If you recall, what happens after that is Laban tells him, he says, Jacob says, well, look, I've got a family now. I've got children now. I want to go home. I want to go back to Canaan land. I want to go back to the land that was promised to me. And Laban says, what? Work for me 6 more years. This is 20 years. And during that time, he struggles. That last 6 years, he struggles against Laban because they come with an agreement. What will you get? Well, I'll get, and if you're reading the King James, it's a little confusing there, but basically what it comes down to is, do you get the speckled animals, the ones with spots, or do you get the streaked animals, the ones with stripes? You're not going to get the pure animals, but you're going to get either spots or stripes. And so Jacob, and we find out later this is by the inspiration of the Lord, although it's still kind of a little bit of trickery here on Laban. Jacob has a method that he can make. If Laban says you get the ones with spots, Jacob can make it to where only the ones with spots get strong and reproduce a lot. So the majority is his. And then Laban comes back around, and what does he do? He changes the agreement. Well, actually, I want the ones with spots. You get the ones with stripes. And what does he do? Now the ones with stripes become the strong ones and the most. And he goes back and forth in this battle with Laban, and in the end, what does he do? He does what he did with his brother. He runs away. He takes what's his and he runs away. And then he struggles to go home because what happens? Well, good old Rachel goes in and steals the idols from Laban's household. Now it wasn't wrong for Jacob to take what was his and leave. It might have been against their customs, but it wasn't a sin. But now she's got idols with her, which is a sin against God, and she stole them, which is a sin against God. And Laban chases him down. He struggles with Laban. This is going to follow him all his life. He struggles to meet Esau. He's terrified that when he comes back, Esau is going to make good on his promise and kill him. And so there's that whole scene where he sends gifts and he sends people. And another place where Jacob shows he's kind of a coward, he sends his servants out. Kind of feelers. Well, if they all get slaughtered, I'll know what the score is. He actually uses his family, his wives and his children as shields to kind of test the waters. And so he struggles to meet Esau. But on one of those occasions, and that's what we're going to come to in a moment, he struggles with God all night long. Then he goes on to struggle with Shechem, the Hivite. He goes on to struggle over Joseph's death, which wasn't a true death, but he believed Joseph had been killed, his son whom he loved. He struggles with famine. Famine comes into the land, and his family is who had been doing so well are now at the point that they'll starve if they don't get help. He struggles with the captivity of Benjamin. He sends off his beloved son of his old age, and he gets taken into Egyptian captivity under the hand of Joseph. You might think of a few more things that he struggles with. But this man, you take him all the way back from the time he was in the womb, fighting with his brother in the womb, all the way up until he's a very old man, And as our scripture reading said this morning, Pharaoh said, "How old are you?" And he says, "Man, my days are full of trouble. I'm an old man, and my days have been full of trouble." Struggles, difficulties. Some of them he brought on himself. Some of them came from outside sources. But the fact of the matter is, he spent a lifetime of struggling. Now, this speaks to me, and it might speak to you if you're struggling with something right now. And what's so beautiful about looking at the life of Jacob, when I consider maybe what I'm going through, is sometimes we have a tendency to give ourselves a pass, and we act like nothing's my fault. But I don't think that's the typical thing with Christians and people who would be in an assembly like this, who want to know God, who want to serve God. I think the stronger tendency for us is to be too hard on ourselves and to think because I'm struggling, I'm not good enough for God, or because I'm struggling, I'm not faithful to God, or because... The story of Jacob, Israel, the man for whom God's people are named, is that I can struggle and struggle mightily. But if I keep on fighting through the struggle and I keep on holding to God and I keep on looking for God, God will bring me through. And if in the end, if I'll maintain faithfulness to Him, God will save my soul. God can bless me and God can me even though I struggle. And the beauty of Jacob is, it might be in your case, it might be in my case, that my struggle is something that I brought upon myself. You might be struggling because of your own sin that you committed. You might be in that sin right now, and that's why you're struggling. And yet God doesn't throw you away or cast you away. He opens His invitation and says, "Look, repent of that sin. Come to me. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of you." You might be struggling because not of a sin you're in now, but maybe a sin you committed before. And you're struggling because you have to face the consequences of that sin. And you say, how can I even have any compassion on myself or expect others to have compassion on me because I brought this on myself? Well, I'm going to tell you something. Jacob knows what that was. And Jacob found the comfort of God through that. Jacob was guilty of some of the struggles that he faced. He brought them on himself. In fact, to be honest, when you look at the sum total of his life, when he tricked his father and stole that blessing, you could line up just about every other problem he had came from that moment of being a liar and a cheater and hurting his brother. So it breaks your heart if you read that passage and you watch Esau come in the room after he left. And Esau cries out when he finds out he's lost that blessing. Broke that man's heart. Broke his brother's heart. So many of the struggles he faces after that are because of his deceitful behavior. And yet God has compassion on him, and yet God continues to direct his steps, and yet God continues to bless him, and yet God continues to allow him to be the man who's going to be the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, one of whom Judah, through whom the Christ would come. Don't trick yourself into believing that because I struggle, God doesn't want anything to do with me. Don't trick yourself into believing that because I struggle, God can't use me. God has always saved the struggling. God has always used those who struggle. We're going to look at that one case, that time that he struggled directly with God. You could argue that in a lot of these he struggled with God. But we want to look at that one particular where he very directly struggled with God all night long. We're going to look at that and just learn three things from it. Jacob struggled with God from Genesis 32. We're going to learn just three things from this. This is that time where he is coming back to meet Esau, and he's scared that Esau is going to kill him, and he's using a river kind of strategically to incrementally and slowly make his way back into the promised land, back into where Esau is going to be located. And so everyone else, his servants and his family, have crossed over the river. He remains behind alone. I don't know why in this particular case. We could guess, but there's no point to it. But what we know is he's alone, and what we know is God comes in to struggle with him. And our first point is that he is persistent despite the struggle, and that is in verse 24. We're going to start back at 22 and read down to 24. It says, "Then he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over that he had." So that's his possessions. He sends everything over Jabbok. "And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day." What we're going to know about this man is he's not a natural man. This is an angelic form. So that's the first thing we're going to know about this man that he's wrestling. This isn't a natural man. He appeared by the will of God. We're going to see that as we read through. This struggle is a struggle with God. We're going to see that as we pass through. But what we need to understand is this. I don't know if any of you, or how many of you, I'm sure some of you have. Some of you are military, and I know you've done hand-to-hand combat. I lived in college with a sheriff's deputy who was also on the EST, which is like their sheriff department's version of the SWAT team. If something occurred in the county where they needed SWAT, they called out this EST, this special force that would come out and breach homes and stuff like that. And he taught me that whenever they have an altercation where someone is fighting back, especially if they're much stronger than the deputy, that they have what they call the 90-second triangle. And he said the rule they had was you wanted 3 officers there, and each officer only fought for 30 seconds. And he said, and the reason for that is, if you fight someone stronger than you for 30 seconds, it exhausts you. And so what they do is, 2 officers kind of hold their strength in reserve while the one fights, and then he'll tap out after 30 seconds, and another one will tap in, and then the other one will. And the hope is that even though this person is much stronger than any one of us, that through this process we'll be able to subdue that person. I've done some wrestling. I wasn't like a college wrestler, but I was the small guy, the skinny guy. So it was always like, well, you want to wrestle? And they would ask me to wrestle. So I did some wrestling. I had a best friend who was a championship wrestler, and so I did a lot of wrestling in high school and college, but just street wrestling. I'm going to tell you something. It's exhausting to wrestle. I remember one wrestling match in particular where they sized me up with a guy that was about my size and about my strength, and we probably wrestled for 5 to 6 minutes, and I was worn out. And that's just somebody who's about my size and my strength. What we're seeing here is that a representative of God is wrestling him, and he's not wrestling for 30 seconds, and he's not wrestling for 5 minutes. He is wrestling all night long. And he's not wrestling all night long after he got his nice carb load and he got his right diet in, and then he slept for 10 hours getting prepared for the fight. This man has been stressed out in his mind. This man has been traveling through difficult circumstances and difficult places. This man has just finished the arduous task of crossing over a river with his family and his possessions, and he comes back to the place he's going, and now he's thrown into this wrestling match. And the point in the message that I hope that we can take from this is, if I want to be faithful to God, even through my struggles, I've got to be persistent. What will cause me to fail and what may cause me to lose my soul is when a struggle comes, and this can be a struggle I bring on myself through sin or foolishness. This can be a struggle that someone else places upon me, or this can be a struggle that comes by happenstance. But the fact of the matter is, if in that struggle I decide I'm going to give up that's when failure comes. And that's when I can open myself up to the wiles of the devil. You think about that when it comes to a struggle. Say, for instance, what about a struggle with sin? What about a difficult sin that you're trying to overcome? If you give up, guess who wins? The devil wins. What about a struggle that doesn't have to do with sin, but it's a difficulty of life? Say, for instance, a diagnosis of some from a doctor that is overwhelming. If I give up and I get angry at God over it and I give up, guess who wins? What about the loss of a loved one? And I say, well, you know what? If that's the case, then I just quit. I'm just done. Guess who wins? The first lesson I learned from Jacob in this wrestling match he has with that angel of God, that messenger from God, that wrestling match, the first thing I learned from him is I need to be persistent. I cannot imagine the physical toll this took on Jacob to continue that match until the break of dawn. I can't imagine the physical toll it took on him, but he didn't give up. I need to be persistent. Number 2, I need to be resilient through pain. I don't know how I missed this before. I guess I just hadn't thought about it that much. I've never had a shoulder or a hip or anything get out of joint, but I have had my back go out before, and I don't know how that compares. Maybe if you've had this injury, you'll know a little better than I do. But if you read verse 25, this kind of blows my mind. And when he saw he prevailed not against him, he's talking here about the angel, the messenger of God. When he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. He has a serious internal physical injury, and he continues wrestling. The fact of the matter is that it is likely that nobody in here is going to have wrestling someone with something out of joint in your body as our struggle, but we know some in this room are struggling with incredible pain right now. You're struggling through something, and there's incredible, almost sometimes debilitating pain while you struggle. Some in this room, you're not going through it now, but you remember a time when you did. And some in this room, that's coming down the road. And we can't see it coming, can we? Sometimes it's as simple as a phone call or a knock on the door. And someone that I count on is never going to come home again. I can't see that coming. The second thing I learned from the struggle Jacob had was I need to be resilient through the pain. Even though it hurts, I know the source of that pain. And the source of that pain is the influence of the devil on this world. I know that so many years ago, about 6,000 years ago, that the serpent went to Eve and said, "You shall not surely die." And she was swayed, and she ate, and she gave to her husband, and he ate, and the response to that was that man will die. And the response to that was that sin is in the world. And the response to that was disease is in the world and difficulties in the world. And there's going to be sinners and sinful people and people that rebel against God, and they might hurt me. I might become one of them and hurt myself or someone else. And that's the reality of it. I can trace it back to the devil. I can trace it back to what James said about sin. God, say not when you're tempted, I'm tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But when a man is led away, he's led away by his own lust. He's drawn away of his own lust and enticed. The source of the pain is the devil. The source of the hope is God. And so if I will persist through the pain, if I will be resilient through the pain, I can come out the other end. Number one, I can come out stronger. Maybe not physically speaking. Jacob's going to limp the rest of his life. But I'll tell you something, and those of you in this room who've been through a very, very difficult trial, you know this. If you come through faithfully, If you come out the other end with God, you are stronger when you come out the other end. He comes out stronger. The third point is he was determined to prevail. I love this part of the passage. This part is the part that kind of almost makes me laugh. I know it's serious in a sense, but it's just funny that he had this audacity. And it reminds me of what Paul talks about boldly coming before the throne of God. Jesus saying, let the desire of your heart be known to God. He says what? He wrestled with him, and now the Lord, the messenger of God, says, and he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. Evidently, his commandment was something to do with time orientation. In other words, he had a time limit on what he was sent to do. And it had to do with when day breaks. He had that night, I suppose, to struggle with Jacob. Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. Now let's understand a couple things here. This messenger of God, this angel of God, is not restrained by the fact that he cannot defeat Jacob. You remember that one angel killed 85,000 Assyrians in one night. You remember that one angel killed the firstborn of Egypt in one night. He is not restrained by his natural ability. He's restrained likely more as in the same way the devil was restrained when it came to the case of Lot. The devil could do things, but he could only do things within the set instructions and allowance of God. It is clear that God sent this angel with a time limit. It is clear that God sent this angel with a power limit. God set this scenario up for Jacob such that Jacob couldn't win in the sense of he couldn't the messenger of God and send him away, but he also was set up to where he wouldn't be totally overpowered by this one who came from God. But that if he were persistent and if he would push through the pain, that he would be able to maintain this struggle until the morning came. And then if he did that persistence, what do we say it is? Sometimes the struggle is the victory. If he would be willing to continue the struggle until that time, then that would be his victory. And sometimes, brothers and sisters, we have to see that. I don't have to win every fight in my life. Sometimes I just have to survive it. I don't have to come out of every scenario victorious. I just have to make sure I come out of it with God. One day, somebody's going to say to me, if I'm fortunate to live that long, someone's going to say to me, you've got 6 months. You've got 3 months. Or the end is near, or something along those lines. And I'm going to lay in a hospital bed. And I'm not going to win that fight. But I can come through it with God. One day a doctor might come in and say, like he said to some of my friends I have, you're never going to walk again. And you know what the truth of the matter is? I may never walk again. I won't win that fight, but I can come through it with God. One day my spouse might say to me, I'm going to leave you. And I do everything in my power I can to save the marriage, but I might not win that fight. I may not win that struggle, but I can come through it with God. The message of this sermon isn't let's go out and win. Sometimes we will win. Sometimes God will give us the victory. The message of this sermon is I need to redefine what it means to win. Jacob didn't win the fight, but Jacob won here. Because sometimes the victory is in the struggle. I choose to continue the struggle. I choose not to take the coward's way out, the easy way out. And I need to be determined to prevail. And I love what he said. I won't let you go unless you bless me. You know, Jacob could have said something different there. He could have said what I'm tempted to say sometimes. I'm not going to let you go because you started it. What do I focus on? I focus on the immediate. I focus on I'm not going to let you go because I'm going to win. That's not what he said. Where were his eyes and where was his mind? His eyes and mind were on the spiritual. What did Jacob want out of this? Did he want to be the strongest man in the region? No. Did he want to be stronger than this servant of God? No. What did he want out of this? He wanted a spiritual blessing. And brothers and sisters, when I'm struggling with something, it can totally change my perspective if what I seek in the outcome is a spiritual blessing. I don't care if I lose the fight. I don't care if somebody gets one over on me. I don't care if I lose money or a job. I don't care what the losses are. If I can come out the other side blessed by God. And that's what he says. And does he receive a blessing or does he receive a blessing? He says, your name is changed to Israel. A name by which God's people will be known down through the ages. He's the son of promise. I don't know what your struggle is. If you're struggling today, I do feel for you. If there's a way that I can help you, or especially we have elders here, shepherds here, their primary role in their spiritual lives is to help you with your struggles. They'll help you. You got to open up to them. But I'll say this, the end of our sermon is this. If what you're struggling with is sin, God has the answer. You can be saved, and it doesn't matter that you're struggling. Some people say, well, you don't know how bad I am. Once I get this struggle figured out, then I'll be saved. No, that's not how it works. You'll be saved by God, or you won't be saved at all. That struggle with God, or you'll finish it out without Him. That's the fact of the matter. So if you'll be saved, how would you do it? You'd hear the word of God, Romans 10:17. Believe, John 8:24. Repent, Acts 17:30. Confess, Romans 10:10. And be baptized, Acts 2:38. These are the things that Jesus says, do these and you'll be saved. Do these and you'll have the remission and the forgiveness of sins. Have you done those things? Are you somewhere on that list? We are ready and willing and eager to help you this morning. We have water ready. We have people here ready to study if you need to study more. Or it might be for you, you've done those things, but you've wandered away from God and you want to come home. You realize, if you look at your life and the struggles you're going through, you realize, I'm not living faithfully. I've let sin reign in me again. If it's private, take it to God privately. If it's public, handle it publicly. We'll pray with you. We'll pray for you. We'll help you. We'll encourage you. It may be that it's not sin for you. It may be for you. It's just that you really are struggling right now, and it's hard and it's difficult, and you just want the prayers of your brothers and sisters in Christ. We'll pray for you. Whatever your need is, won't you let it be known while we stand, while we sing this song?